You might think you already know what dinosaurs look like, but honestly, you probably don't. Most of what we think we know comes from pretty limited evidence, sometimes just a few scattered bones, and in extreme cases, a single fossil. When all we have are skeletons, we're forced to fill in the gaps with whatever seems logical to us. But think about it this way. If scientists in the future uncovered nothing but an elephant skull, would they ever imagine it had massive floppy ears or a long trunk? Probably not. So that raises a big question. What are we missing right now? Could sauropods have had trunks? Did T-Rex have something like a wobbly chicken-style throat pouch? Well, what if I told you that for a handful of dinosaurs, we actually don't have to guess? For a few species, we know exactly what they looked like. Not just their bones, but their skin, muscles, and even their colors. So here are 6 dinosaurs whose appearances we know in incredible detail. The first one completely flipped everything we thought we knew about dinosaur feathers. For a long time, scientists believed feathers only showed up on tiny, bird-like dinosaurs. The logic made sense. The larger an animal is, the better it retains heat, so extra insulation wouldn't be necessary. And for a while, that idea seemed solid. The biggest feathered dinosaur we discovered was Beipiaosaurus, which, just to put it in perspective, was about 30 times smaller than what came next. Then we found Yutyrannus. Yutyrannus was a close relative of Tyrannosaurus, a huge predator over 30 feet long and weighing about 1.4 tons. And the real shock? We didn't just find one fossil. We uncovered several nearly complete skeletons, all preserved with feathers covering their bodies from head to toe. But don't picture bird feathers meant for flying. The feathers were more like thick fur, with some strands growing almost 8 inches long. And it really makes sense when you realize where Yutyrannus lived. The climate there was closer to modern-day Canada. Cold winters meant this dinosaur needed insulation. In other words, Yutyrannus was basically a woolly T-Rex. But it wasn't the only dinosaur that completely changed how we picture these animals. That brings us to Psittacosaurus, a small but incredibly important dinosaur from China. With more than 500 fossils discovered, it's one of the best understood dinosaurs we've ever found. And some of those fossils are basically time capsules. They preserve details like skin texture, body shape, color patterns. I'll get to that part in a second. But first, let's talk color. Because of how well these fossils were preserved, scientists were able to identify pigment-storing cells. They couldn't determine the exact shades, but they did figure out the pattern. Psittacosaurus had a lighter belly and a darker back. That's classic countershading, the same kind of camouflage you see in animals like deer today. And now things get a little strange. Psittacosaurus is one of the only dinosaurs where we know exactly what the cloaca looked like. That's the single opening used for both waste and reproduction. Modern birds and reptiles still have cloacas, and thanks to this fossil, we now know dinosaurs did too. But that wasn't the only surprise hiding in the specimen. It also revealed a row of long, stiff, bristle-like structures sticking straight out of its tail. What were they used for? No one knows for sure. But since Psittacosaurus was an early relative of Triceratops, it's possible that Triceratops, and maybe others like it, had similar tail bristles too. While these fossils let us look deep into the past, what if I told you we've actually discovered mummified dinosaurs? And I don't mean anything like Egyptian mummies. Those are still basically skin wrapped around bones. I'm talking about dinosaurs that were first mummified and then fossilized. So yeah, this is a rare form of preservation stacked on top of another rare form of preservation. Normally, fossils form when the hardest parts of an animal, like bones, slowly get replaced by minerals over millions of years. What you end up with is essentially a stone cast of the original skeleton. The problem is that soft tissues, things like muscles, skin, and internal organs, almost always rot away long before fossilization even starts. But in a handful of extremely rare cases, a dinosaur's body dries out and becomes naturally mummified. That process lets the soft tissue survive long enough to eventually fossilize. One of the best-known examples is a dinosaur nicknamed Dakota. It's mostly famous because of a single fossilized foot, but that foot looks almost exactly like it did the day the animal died. You can see wrinkles in the skin, folds, and even sagging flesh between the toes. But as incredible as that is, it's not even the best example we've found. That honor probably goes to a duck-billed dinosaur known as Leonardo. It was buried so quickly that nearly its entire body was preserved. This is one of the only times we've ever seen a dinosaur almost exactly as it appeared in life. Its skin is still wrapped around the bones. Muscles and tendons are visible. Some internal organs are still there. And inside its stomach, scientists even found traces of its final meal: ferns, conifers, and magnolia leaves, which is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. What they didn't expect, though, was that the stomach also contained around 250 fossilized parasites that had been living inside it. Now here's my favorite part. Because the skin was preserved so well, we can clearly see scale patterns across the body. Different areas had different sizes and shapes of scales. That might give us hints about color patterning, opening up the possibility that some dinosaurs were striped like zebras or spotted like leopards. Unfortunately, no pigments were preserved in this fossil, so we still can't say exactly what color it was. But luckily, there are dinosaurs where we actually do know their colors. The very first one was Anchiornis. When scientists examined its fossilized feathers under a microscope, they found tiny pigment structures called melanosomes. By comparing their shapes to those found in modern birds, researchers were able to reconstruct Anchiornis's coloration. Its body was mostly gray, its wings were black and white, and, most surprisingly, it had a bright, rusty red mohawk on its head. That discovery showed us that dinosaurs were probably just as visually complex as modern birds, using bold colors for things like attracting mates or intimidating rivals. And it gets even cooler with Microraptor, which lived about 35 million years later. This dinosaur had feathers on all 4 limbs, allowing it to glide from tree to tree. Basically, a prehistoric cross between a crow and a flying squirrel. Like Anchiornis, Microraptor's feathers appeared black at first, but that's only part of the story. Microraptor lived in dense forests, where sunlight barely reached the ground. Every once in a while, though, a shaft of sunlight would punch through the canopy. And if Microraptor happened to be in the right spot, that dull black suddenly transformed, shimmering with blues and greens. It basically turned into a flying, iridescent mating display. Alright, before we get to the most lifelike dinosaur fossil ever discovered, there's one more thing you need to know. A nodosaur called Panachosaurus was found with a fossilized larynx, essentially its voice box. When researchers studied it, they realized armored dinosaurs probably didn't just grunt or roar like we always imagined. There's a good chance they actually sounded more like birds. And that makes the fossil of Borealopelta even more mind-blowing, because it's the most detailed dinosaur fossil we've ever found. This animal was nearly 20 feet long and weighed over 3,000 pounds. The idea that something that massive might have chirped like a bird is honestly wild. Borealopelta is also the first non-feathered dinosaur where we've preserved its actual skin color. It had a reddish-brown back and a pale underside, the same kind of countershading we saw earlier with Psittacosaurus. And if an animal that large still needed camouflage, that tells you a lot about the kinds of predators living around it. That's probably why its entire body was covered in thick armor and spikes, turning it into a literal walking tank. But the way Borealopelta died makes the story even stranger. Its stomach still contained bits of charred plants, suggesting it may have been feeding in a forest that had recently burned. The real mystery, though, is where it was found. This dinosaur was discovered more than 100 miles offshore, buried in what used to be a shallow sea. The only other fossils nearby belonged to marine predators like mosasaurs. So, how did a heavily armored land dinosaur end up out there? The leading theory is that after it died, gases built up inside its body, causing it to bloat and float. Scientists think Borealopelta drifted out to sea, eventually sank, flipped onto its back, and settled into the muddy seafloor, perfectly preserving its face and body like a snapshot frozen in time. So, which of these dinosaurs did you think was the coolest?